Part 1. Hiroshima, the gateway to the age of destruction. You're listening to Time's View, where we revisit the most earth-shaking moments in human history. Today, we rewind to the scorching summer of 1945, when the entire world seemed to hold its breath at the final act of the largest, bloodiest, and most catastrophic war ever known, World War II. For 6 long years, Europe's soil, tiny Pacific islands, all turned into battlefields. We remember the millions who fell, the massive campaigns, and massacres that chilled humanity. But if there's one moment that made the whole world freeze, it was the twin atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Not only was it the first, it remains the only time nuclear weapons were ever used in war, and the price was horrifying. Power politics at the endgame. In May 1945, war in Europe officially ended. Berlin collapsed, Hitler committed suicide, and May 8th was marked as Victory Day. But in the Pacific, Japan fought on. Even after crushing defeats at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the Japanese Empire refused to surrender. Tokyo clung to the hope of one last stand, a total war to the death. By then, 66 Japanese cities had been heavily bombed by the U.S. Over 1.7 million lost their homes. Hundreds of thousands died or were injured. On March 9, 1945, a napalm raid on Tokyo alone killed at least 100,000 civilians. Yet just 2 days later, Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo claimed, "The people will adapt to the bombing. Their resolve will only strengthen." But the truth was, Japan's Navy and Air Force had been decimated, its industry crippled, its cities surrounded. There was no escape. Japan's last weapon, the Bushido spirit. Without ships or planes, Japan's only remaining weapon was its people's unwavering belief in the emperor and the samurai spirit, Bushido. In desperation, they unleashed kamikaze pilots, sacrificing themselves by crashing into U.S. warships. Over 3,900 pilots died in these suicide missions. By July 1945, Japan had over 12,000 aircraft, nearly all prepared for kamikaze attacks. A plan called Total War of the People was drawn up. Males aged 15 to 60, females 17 to 45, 28 million citizens armed with whatever they could find. Even factory workers were turned into combat battalions. On the ground, over 2.35 million soldiers were ready, and if Japan fell, they would retreat to Manchuria, where a 1 million-strong Kwantung army stood waiting. Meanwhile, America was also ready to bleed. The U.S. Joint Chiefs presented President Truman with Operation Downfall, a full invasion of Japan. 2 parts: Olympic, invade Kyushu, and Coronet, invade Tokyo. Estimated casualties, over 1.2 million, a horrifying price. Then came July 16, 1945. In the desert of New Mexico, the first nuclear explosion, codenamed Trinity, ripped the sky apart, a power no one had ever imagined. Truman now held the ultimate card. No invasion, no more blood, just one flash. The Potsdam Ultimatum. From July 17th to August 2nd, 1945, Allied leaders met at Potsdam. On July 26th, they issued a final ultimatum. "We call on Japan to surrender unconditionally or face prompt and utter destruction." Tokyo's reaction? Silence. Militarists called it insulting. On July 28th, Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki said, "No comment." Japan would fight on. America made its choice, choosing the target, Hiroshima. A special committee shortlisted Kyoto, Yokohama, Kokura, and Hiroshima. Hiroshima was picked, not just for military value, but because it was largely untouched. America wanted to measure the full impact of this new weapon. August 6, 1945. a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay took off. On board, a bomb named Little Boy. At 8:15 a.m., it dropped, exploded 600 meters above the ground. Hiroshima vanished in white light. 90,000 killed instantly. A 1.6-kilometer radius destroyed. Fires spread across 4.4 square kilometers. 90% of buildings damaged or gone. Thousands more died from burns, radiation, and shock in the days to come. Part 2, The Silent Descent, Nagasaki and the Final Hours. Part 2, The Silent Descent, Nagasaki and the Final Hours. You're listening to Time's View. Last time, we stopped at the moment Hiroshima vanished in a blinding flash. A city, its people, its soul, gone in less than a minute. But that was only the beginning. Ignored warnings. After Hiroshima, Washington didn't mince words. They warned, surrender now, or face more destruction from the skies, like nothing seen before. On August 8, 1945, the U.S. dropped 6 million leaflets over 47 major Japanese cities. They described the atomic bomb's power and urged citizens to plead with the emperor to end the war. Still, Japan said nothing. Meanwhile, Soviet Union declared war at midnight on August 8th. Just hours later, Red Army forces launched a massive offensive into Manchuria, crushing Japan's Kwantung Army. The second bomb was ready. Nagasaki, the final strike. The intended target was Kokura, but clouds forced a last-minute change. The B-29 bomber boxcar turned to Nagasaki. Nagasaki, a key southern port city, housed major military production, ships, torpedoes, weapons. At 7:50 a.m. on August 9th, air raid sirens sounded. But by 8:30, with just 2 B-29s in sight, the alert was cancelled. At 11:01 a.m., the bomb, named Fat Man, was dropped over the city's industrial valley. It detonated 43 seconds later, 469 meters above ground, yield 21,000 tons of TNT. The bomb missed its center. Instead of the main downtown, it exploded between two military plants. Yet 70,000 died instantly. Thousands more were burned, wounded, or poisoned. Fires stretched over 3 kilometers. The emperor intervenes. On the morning of August 9th, Japan's Supreme War Council was still debating surrender. When news of Nagasaki reached Tokyo, Emperor Hirohito stepped in. He urged acceptance of the Potsdam terms with one condition: protect the monarchy. The U.S. debated. Some rejected any favor toward the emperor. Others argued only Hirohito could command total surrender. Finally, America replied, Japan could not choose its government, but the emperor would be safe. A failed coup. Even then, militarists tried to resist. On the night of August 14th, a group of officers stormed the imperial palace, hoping to stop the emperor's surrender speech from airing. They failed. Hirohito and his aides hid the recording. By morning, the coup was over. The ringleaders committed suicide. A voice from a god, and the end. On August 15th, at noon, Emperor Hirohito spoke on radio for the first time. The war has not gone as we wished. We must now endure the unendurable and accept the unacceptable. Japan surrender. Part 3. Nuclear Legacy, War Crime or Necessity. Part 3. Nuclear Legacy, War Crime or Necessity. You're listening to Time's View, and we've walked through the darkest moments in human history. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 2 bombs, 2 cities, hundreds of thousands of lives lost in a flash. The war ended, but the big question still lingers. Was the use of atomic bombs truly necessary? Or was it a war crime cloaked in the veil of victory? Arguments in favor: ending the war to save lives. Supporters of using the atomic bomb, including historians, politicians, and American military personnel, make a simple but powerful point. Without the 2 bombs, the war would have dragged on for months, and the death toll would have been many times higher. Projections for Operation Olympic and Coronet, The planned U.S. invasions estimated over 1.2 million casualties, with around 267,000 American soldiers expected to die. Moreover, every month of prolonged war meant hundreds of thousands more Asian civilians dying in Japanese-occupied territories, up to 200,000 deaths per month. So, they argue, the two explosions shortened the war, ended meaningless bloodshed, and freed millions from occupation. Arguments against: a crime against humanity. On the flip side, many voices argue that using atomic bombs was immoral and indefensible. The targets were civilians. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not key military bases, but homes to thousands of women, children, and the elderly. Professors Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard, who once signed a letter urging the development of the bomb, later became some of its fiercest critics. Einstein posed a haunting hypothetical. If Nazi Germany had built 2 atomic bombs first and dropped them on New York, would we have called it a victory or a war crime? Voices from within. Many high-ranking U.S. generals, the very men who led the war, also publicly opposed the bombings. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, later president, wrote in his memoir, "I do not believe the atomic bomb was necessary to force Japan's surrender. They were already defeated. I was deeply troubled by the news." Admiral William Leahy, chief of staff under Roosevelt and Truman, was blunt. The use of this barbarous weapon was of no material assistance in our war against Japan. The Japanese were already defeated and ready to surrender. The list goes on, from General Curtis LeMay, Douglas MacArthur, to military intelligence officers. Many believed Japan was ready to give up even before the bombs were dropped. The real motive? Show of power to the Soviets. Some scholars argue the real goal wasn't just to force Japan to surrender, but to send a message to the Soviet Union. While the war was ending, a new power struggle, the Cold War, was beginning. Professor Gar Alperovitz of Cornell University claimed impressing the Soviets was more important than defeating Japan. One explosion not only obliterated a city, but helped shape a new world order, a weapon that made every nation think twice. The survivors. Unhealable pain. Even after the war ended, the tragedy continued. The survivors of the bombings, known as hibakusha, faced radiation, disease, deformities, and lifelong trauma. They were discriminated against, shunned by society, and even barred from marriage. People feared they couldn't bear healthy children. As of 2023, hundreds of thousands of hibakusha still live in Japan. The legacy, fear and hope. Those 2 bombs ushered in the nuclear age, where one push of a button could erase civilization. Today, there are nearly 13,000 nuclear warheads globally, each far more powerful than the ones dropped on Hiroshima. But perhaps because of their horror, no nation has dared use them again. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, memorials, peace museums, and annual prayers remain, not to stir hatred, but to remind humanity, some wounds, once inflicted, never heal. Final words. What did we learn from hell? Dear listener, when we speak of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the debate remains, was it necessary, or was it a crime? But one truth stands unshaken. Death knows no sides. Whether soldier or civilian, old or young, war always demands too high a price. Today, as we live in peace and have a voice, let us remember, hundreds of thousands never had the chance to speak again. You've been listening to Times View. If this story brought you anything, knowledge, reflection, or a quiet moment, don't forget to share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thank you for staying with us till the end. We'll see you in the next story.